He wasn't trained. He wasn't called. And yet, when everyone else gave up, a lone German shepherd emerged from the snow, silent, scarred, and determined. No badge. No orders. Just one mission: lead a broken woman into the woods and reveal a miracle buried beneath ice and grief. This isn't the story of a hero we expected. It's the story of the one we didn't see coming. And what he chose to protect will leave you speechless. Have you ever wondered if God still sends miracles to the world today? If you believe that God still speaks through love, faithfulness, and the things we least expect, follow this story to the end. And if your heart is touched, leave an amen in the comments below. Please hit that subscribe button so I can send you more amazing stories. Thank you so much for that. The wind howled low through the narrow streets of Pinebrook Ridge, a remote mountain town tucked within the folds of the Absaroka Range in Montana. Snow had been falling for 3 days without pause, turning every rooftop into a pillow of white and every trail into a ghostly corridor. It was early December, but winter here moved early and fast. Ice clung to telephone wires like ivy, and snowdrifts curled over the edges of the highway like waves frozen mid-break. Patrol Officer Emily Sanders steered her Ford Explorer slowly along Route 47, tires crunching against the compacted slush. Her windshield wipers groaned under the thickening snow, pushing back the swirling frost that tried to claim her vision. She leaned forward slightly, squinting through the cold haze, jaw tight and eyes sharp. Emily was 34, tall and rangy with a runner's build honed by stress and solitude. Her brown hair was cut just below the chin, practical and tucked beneath a navy beanie. There was a faint scar above her right eyebrow, a relic from her NYPD days, a reminder of what she'd left behind. Her expression, once open and quick to smile, had grown more reserved in the last 2 years, haunted by an event she rarely discussed: the death of her former K-9 partner and closest friend, Bruno, during a botched hostage rescue in Brooklyn. After that, Emily had resigned her commission, packed what was left of her life into 2 duffel bags, and driven west without looking back. Pinebrook had offered her a place to disappear, or perhaps, unknowingly, to begin again. The road ahead curved sharply near the base of Grayback Summit, an area known for sudden snowdrifts and frequent wildlife crossings. As Emily slowed to a crawl, something appeared in the middle of the road, obscured by the flurries. At first, she thought it might be a fallen branch or deer, but then it moved, slowly, deliberately. Her hand instinctively tapped the brakes. The shape resolved into a large dog. Not just large, massive. A German shepherd, his coat once regal, but now matted with grime and patches of snow clinging to the fur like frostbite. He stood still in the center of the road, head raised, amber eyes locked onto her headlights. There was something ancient in the way he carried himself, no panic, no fear. Just presence. Emily eased her vehicle to a stop, threw it into park, and turned off the siren. For a moment, it was as if time folded inward, just her and the dog, surrounded by the quiet storm. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply stared. Then, without warning, he turned, his body limping slightly, and began to walk toward the woods flanking the roadside. He paused once, looking back over his shoulder, not in fear, but in invitation. Something in Emily stirred. It wasn't logic or protocol, it was instinct. She popped the door and stepped out into the snow, boots crunching against the frozen gravel. Her breath escaped in clouds. "Hey there," she called softly, careful not to spook him. "You lost?" The German shepherd didn't react to her voice. He simply continued forward, slow but sure. She noted his limp, right hind leg. Possibly injured. But he was moving with purpose, not like a stray, but like a dog on a mission. Emily hesitated only a moment before keying her radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I've encountered an untagged shepherd, injured, possibly trained. Eastbound Route 47 near Grayback Turnoff. I'm going to follow on foot. We'll check back in 10. She clicked off the mic before they could tell her to wait. Something told her this couldn't wait. She followed the dog into the woods. Pines towered on either side like cathedral pillars, their branches heavy with snow. The wind dropped the further she walked, replaced by a hush so complete it felt sacred. The German shepherd, still unnamed in her mind, moved ahead with steady, limping steps. Every so often, he would stop and glance back, ensuring she was still there. Emily's flashlight beam cut through the storm, catching glints of his fur, sable and black, dulled by weather and time. Her thoughts drifted, uninvited, to Bruno. To that last night in Brooklyn. To the hallway full of smoke and the silence that followed the gunshot. She hadn't spoken to anyone about it in months. Not really. Pinebrook's people were kind, but gave space. No one here asked questions she didn't want to answer. But now, as this unknown dog led her deeper into the trees, she felt the heaviness of memory pressed against her ribs. They walked for nearly 15 minutes in silence. Then suddenly the dog stopped at the base of a small hill. He looked at her once more, then sat down in the snow, eyes focused on a point just ahead. Emily caught up, breathing harder now, and followed his gaze. There was nothing at first, just trees, snow, and shadow. Then she saw it, a black strap poking out from beneath a thin blanket of snow. Kneeling, she brushed it back, revealing what looked like a cracked piece of plastic, maybe a device. She cleared more snow, an emergency locator beacon, military grade. The nylon strap was torn, the serial code nearly scratched off, but a tag remained, property of Michael Granger. Her breath hitched. The name was familiar. Granger was a wilderness survival instructor and part-time K-9 trainer who had gone missing 2 days ago during an avalanche simulation drill. Search and rescue teams had scoured this area but found nothing, until now. Emily looked at the dog, who was now lying down beside the beacon, calm but watchful. "You knew," she whispered. "You were with him, weren't you?" She reached out carefully, resting her gloved hand on his shoulder. His fur was cold and damp. No collar, but his composure and the way he had led her spoke louder than any tag. This wasn't a lost dog. This was a partner. She clicked her radio again. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I found a beacon belonging to Michael Granger. Location, southeast quadrant of Grayback Slope. I believe his dog found me and led me here. I'm requesting immediate support and SAR deployment to my location." A crackle on the line, then confirmation. As she waited, she sat beside the dog. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "You've got the eyes of someone who's seen too much." The German shepherd didn't answer, of course, but laid his head on his paws and let out a long, quiet sigh. Emily watched him in the stillness. Snow fell soft and silent around them, blanketing the forest in silver. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Not entirely. When the rescue team arrived, the dog stood slowly, tail low but steady. Emily turned to him one last time before the others took over. "You brought me here," she said. "You brought us hope." And in her chest, something long frozen cracked and shifted, not broken but beginning to thaw. The forest swallowed sound as the rescue team pulled away, their footsteps crunching faintly against the snow-laden underbrush until they disappeared into the soft gloom of late afternoon. Emily stood alone again at the edge of the woods, her breath catching in short clouds. The beacon she'd found earlier now rested in her gloved hand, the small metal casing cold to the touch, its LED long extinguished, its strap torn. It was battered, worn, but unmistakably marked, property of Michael Granger. She stared at the name, heart thudding harder than the cold could explain. It wasn't just a clue. It was a tether, a whisper from a man who might still be out there, alone, broken, alive. Or worse. Beside her, the German shepherd sat in the snow, unmoving, tail curved around his legs. His fur was damp, clumped with ice near the haunches, and faint traces of old scabs lined the left side of his neck. He'd seen trouble. Emily had started calling him Hunter in her mind. It wasn't official, but it felt right. He had the look of one who sought more than safety. He sought purpose. She watched him carefully. His gaze never wavered, always scanning the treeline, as if measuring every shadow for meaning. Emily raised her radio again. "Dispatch, this is Officer Sanders. I'm still on site at Grayback Lower Ridge. The beacon's dead, likely been exposed to weather too long, but I'm requesting grid search support on foot. Based on the dog's behavior, I believe the subject may be close." Static hissed for a beat, then the dispatcher's voice crackled through. Affirmative, Officer Sanders. Ground Team ETA 15. Recommend you hold position. Emily glanced at Hunter, who rose slowly and took a step forward into the deeper snow, head lowered, ears pricked. Negative, she replied. We're moving. The forest thickened as they descended into the lower slope, where the snow deepened in waves and drifts piled like dunes between the trees. Hunter moved with surprising precision for a dog with an injured leg. He navigated around hidden rocks and low branches with the focus of a professional, stopping every few yards to sniff the air or examine the ground. Emily followed, her boots sinking into the powder, fingers numbing around her flashlight. Her mind wandered as she walked, inevitably drawn back to New York, to the old apartment on 48th and West End, to Bruno. Bruno had been her K9 partner for 4 years, a thick-coated black Labrador with an absurd love of peanut butter and an instinct for danger that had saved her more times than she could count. He'd died shielding her from a grenade tossed during a hostage standoff in Brooklyn. The blast killed him instantly and shattered Emily's shoulder. After that, something inside her fractured too. Not just from grief, but from guilt. She hadn't returned to K9 after that. She hadn't even returned to herself. And yet, this dog, this quiet, broken German shepherd, was tugging loose threads she thought she'd stitched shut forever. They stopped abruptly. Hunter's body tensed. Emily froze beside him and looked up. The trees parted, revealing a steep drop, a ridge, slick with ice, flanked by jagged rock. It was barely visible in the gray dim. Hunter took a few cautious steps forward, tail still, nose lifted toward the wind. Then he growled low and gravelly, not out of fear, but as a warning. Emily crouched at the edge and looked down. At first, she saw nothing but shadows and snow. Then, her flashlight beam caught on a glint of green nylon. She squinted. A torn backpack, partially buried in a drift. Her pulse surged. She slid down slowly, boots carving narrow trenches in the snow. Hunter followed behind her, limping but committed. The air was colder here, biting and sharp, and the silence felt heavy. The pack had an embroidered patch near the top flap, MG, and a faded logo for a survival training academy based in Billings. The straps were frayed, one of the buckles snapped clean in half. Inside, Emily found a soaked notebook, a water purifier, and a cracked emergency flare. No blood, no sign of a struggle. But it was clear, Michael had been here, and recently. She turned to Hunter. "Is this where you lost him?" she asked softly. He didn't move, just sat beside the bag, ears twitching toward the forest ahead. Emily looked uphill. No way he climbed back up. Looked downhill, just more trees, deeper cold. She had to make a choice. She keyed the radio again. "This is Sanders. I've found Granger's gear, backpack, supplies, no body. I'm proceeding northeast down slope. Advise backup to track my coordinates." As she stood, a voice echoed faintly through the trees. "Emily?" She turned sharply. From the ridge line above, a figure in bright orange winter gear was waving. A man, stocky, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a field radio clipped to his vest. "I'm Davis, search and rescue. You Sanders?" Emily nodded. Davis made his way down with practiced ease. "We've been scanning from the North Ridge. Your call came in just before our sweep. We'll send a drone this direction." Davis, in his early 40s, had the air of someone who thrived in discomfort. His beard was thick with frost, and his voice carried authority without aggression. "Is that your K9?" he asked. Emily looked at Hunter. "No," she said. "He's Michael Granger's, I think. Or was." Davis crouched near the pack. "Looks like he stayed with it until someone came. Loyal. Like the old ones." He smiled faintly. "You don't see that much anymore." Hunter, as if aware, stood and began moving again, this time heading toward the narrow pass where the forest darkened into tangled bramble. Emily followed without hesitation. Davis sighed but kept pace. "Guess we're trusting the dog." The trail narrowed. Snow was deeper now, past their calves, and Emily could feel her knees burning. Every few feet, Hunter would pause, sniff, move again. The sun was long gone, and the moon cast long slashes of silver between the trees. After another quarter mile, Hunter suddenly stopped and sat down. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just stared at a cluster of pines ahead. Emily approached slowly. Beneath one tree, barely visible beneath a mound of snow and pine needles, was a military-grade blanket, curled around something. Someone. She dropped to her knees and pulled it back gently. A man's face, half covered in frost, pale and still. His beard was longer than in the missing photos, his lips cracked, his breath shallow but present. "Michael," she breathed. "He's alive." Hunter lay down beside him, his body touching Michael's, as if refusing to give him up. Emily reached for her radio, voice shaking. "This is Officer Sanders. I've located Michael Granger. Alive. Unconscious. Severe hypothermia. Request immediate medevac. Coordinates transmitting now." Davis knelt beside her, already pulling out a thermal blanket and his trauma kit. "We need to stabilize him now, or he won't make it to the airlift." Emily looked at Hunter, who was watching her steadily. "You brought us here," she whispered. "You never left him." The storm eased its grip on Pinebrook Ridge as the night deepened, casting a brittle calm over the snow-draped forest. Somewhere above the tree line, the rotor blades of a rescue helicopter began to echo faintly through the cold, cutting across the silence like a pulse. Emily Sanders knelt beside the unconscious body of Michael Granger, one gloved hand pressed to the side of his neck, confirming what she'd already hoped. His pulse, faint but steady. The radio on her shoulder crackled with confirmation of an incoming medevac, coordinates locked. Hunter lay beside his fallen handler, his body curled slightly, muzzle resting near Michael's shoulder, eyes half-lidded but watchful. Davis, the stocky SAR veteran with a wide frame and steady hands, was focused on preparing a warming pack, stuffing it into the folds of Michael's jacket. "He's lucky," Davis muttered, shaking his head. "No food, barely any heat, and no movement. Another hour, and he might have gone silent for good." Emily didn't answer. Her gaze drifted toward Hunter, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The dog hadn't left Michael once. Not for warmth. Not for food. Just stayed. Waited. Endured. 30 minutes later, the clearing above shimmered with light as the helicopter hovered in position. Two medics rappelled down in bright red suits, one of them a lean man with freckles and nervous eyes, the other a woman built like a runner, strong and calm. They moved quickly, with the smooth efficiency of those who train for worst-case scenarios. As the stretcher was secured and Michael's vitals stabilized, Emily stepped aside to call in the official report. That's when she noticed a third figure emerging from the second supply chopper that had landed farther down the trail. A slender woman in her early 30s, dressed in a navy blue parka, her hood pushed back to reveal a pale face framed by auburn hair tied tightly into a single braid. Her boots crunched as she stepped across the snow with quiet urgency, her hazel eyes scanning the group before settling on the stretcher. Rachel Granger stood still for a long second, as if the entire world had narrowed to the man on the gurney. She looked like someone who hadn't been out in the wild for years, pale from lab lighting, hands calloused from precise work, but not field trauma. Rachel was 5'7", willowy but firm, her posture not defiant but closed, like a door halfway shut. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a laminated ID badge clipped to her parka. Dr. Rachel Granger, Veterinary Services, Montana Wildlife Emergency Response, MWER. Rachel had once been known statewide as one of the most promising dual-discipline responders, qualified both in animal trauma and wilderness first aid. But 5 years ago, during a backcountry avalanche rescue, she'd lost both a patient and her fiancé, Eli Morrison, another responder. His body had never been recovered, only his glove and the collar of the dog he'd trained. After that, Rachel had vanished from field work. She quit her second year of veterinary trauma residency and took a research position in Bozeman, refusing SAR calls, refusing the woods. Until tonight, Rachel moved closer, her hands tight at her sides. Her breath caught when she saw Hunter, sitting calmly beside the stretcher, eyes rising to meet hers. There was no growl, no bark, just a stillness that seemed to echo with recognition. "Rachel?" Emily said, stepping forward. He's been with your brother the whole time. Found me. Led us to him." Rachel's voice, when it came, was hushed and strangely clear. "That's not possible." Davis, still crouched by the stretcher, looked up. "We figured he was a K9 companion, loyal to the end." Rachel knelt slowly, ignoring the chatter around her, and held out her hand, not close enough to touch, but enough for the dog to see. "I trained that stance," she whispered. "That step, the way his head tilts, that's not chance. That's conditioning." Hunter, as if confirming her words, lowered his head slightly, then looked past her toward the stretcher. Rachel blinked hard. This was Eli's method. He trained his dogs to read nonverbal cues. "I haven't seen that tilt since." She stopped short. Her voice had started to crack. She stood abruptly and turned away from the group, her back rising and falling as if struggling against the memories. Emily followed her a few paces. "You okay?" "No," Rachel replied bluntly. "But I'm here." They stood in silence, the medics working efficiently behind them, Hunter now pacing slowly near the stretcher as if ready to board it himself. Rachel eventually turned back, her face pale but steady. "I need to examine him," she said, gesturing toward Hunter. Emily nodded. "He's limping. Looks like right rear leg trauma, but I haven't seen any open wounds." Rachel approached the dog slowly, crouching low. "You remember me, don't you?" she said under her breath. "I don't know if you were one of ours or just learned the same way. But either way, you stayed." Her hands moved methodically, checking his paws, legs, then his neck. Multiple abrasions. Bruised haunch. Probably frostbite in one paw pad. "He's dehydrated, but alert. And he's waiting." She glanced at Emily. "He doesn't care about the helicopter. Or the medics. He's waiting to follow your lead." "Not mine," Emily said quietly. "Michael's." An hour later, back at the Pinebrook Emergency Operations Base, Rachel walked Hunter down a freshly shoveled path toward a temporary warming station set up in a firehouse garage. The dog trotted beside her, no leash needed, tail low but not tucked. Rachel paused beneath a flickering light, watching his gait. "You shouldn't still be moving," she murmured. "But you are." Her voice softened. "You and I both." Inside the garage, a portable kennel lined with blankets awaited him. Rachel didn't cage him, just set the blankets down and offered a shallow bowl of water, lightly warmed. Hunter sniffed it, licked once, then lay down beside it instead of drinking. Rachel sat cross-legged beside him, her knees brushing the edge of his fur. Emily entered quietly, a takeout coffee in hand. She offered one to Rachel, who took it with a grateful nod. "You came back," Emily said. Rachel's eyes didn't leave the dog. "I said I wouldn't. Swore off it all. But when I got the call, and they said the dog might be K9, and that Michael was alive, I had to know." She hesitated. "I didn't expect him to look like Eli's last dog. Move like him. React like him. You think he's the same?" "No. But training lives in the body," Rachel replied. "Even after the people are gone." They sat in silence for a moment, steam rising from their cups. Hunter shifted in his sleep, one paw twitching as if chasing some remembered signal through the snow. The following morning, sunlight filtered through a broken patch of clouds, casting a golden sheen over the frosted evergreens surrounding Pinebrook's emergency base. The storm had finally passed, but the cold remained sharp, biting at exposed skin like a reminder that winter still ruled this town. Emily Sanders stood just outside the firehouse garage, her uniform jacket zipped to the neck, one hand nursing a warm cup of coffee. Across the lot, Rachel Granger emerged from the makeshift kennel area, her parka already dusted with a fresh layer of powder despite the brief sunlight. Her braid swung slightly as she walked, purposeful but less guarded than the night before. There was something softer in her expression, as if the armor she wore for years had finally cracked, even just a little. Inside, Hunter lay curled beneath a thick wool blanket, his right leg carefully bandaged with gauze and vet wrap. He hadn't whimpered once during the procedure. His body, though clearly exhausted, remained calm and alert. His eyes followed every person that moved through the room, not with fear but with intent. He was watching for one man only. Rachel knelt beside him again, checking his pulse and gently brushing away frost that clung to his ears. "Still no appetite," she muttered. "But his hydration's improving. I think once Michael stabilizes, so will he." Her voice was measured, but Emily caught the hint of attachment beneath the clinical tone. A low knock at the open bay door interrupted the moment. A tall, wiry man stepped in, his gray windbreaker marked with Montana Search Command. He looked to be in his late 40s, with deep-set eyes, an angular jawline, and wind-chapped skin that spoke of years on high ridges. His name tag read Larson. "Morning," he said, nodding at both women. "I'm Captain Ray Larson. I was on Michael Granger's last training rotation 6 months back. Heard he was found thanks to the dog." He nodded toward Hunter. "Incredible story. We'd like to retrace Michael's route." Drone picked up possible boot slides and displaced brush near Echo Ridge. "You two up for a ground recon?" Emily stood straighter. "Absolutely. We owe it to Michael to understand what happened, and how he survived." Rachel hesitated, then looked at Hunter, who was slowly pushing himself up to standing. He limped a few steps, tested his paw, then looked toward the door. "He wants to come," she said quietly. Larson raised an eyebrow. "Is he cleared for field movement?" Rachel exhaled. "Not medically. But I think he knows the rest of the route, and I'd rather follow a dog with memory than any map." By noon, the group was moving through the thinned forest northeast of the original search zone. Snow crunched underfoot, but the worst of the ice had crusted over, allowing easier movement. Hunter led the way, ears perked despite the occasional stumble in deeper patches of snow. Emily stayed close behind, rifle slung for safety but untouched. Rachel carried her portable med kit and a small thermos of warm broth just in case Hunter tired. Larson brought up the rear, his long strides deliberate, his eyes scanning the ridgeline above. As they moved, the terrain sloped sharply. The trees thinned, revealing exposed rock faces and gullies partially concealed by snow. Hunter paused at one such clearing, nose twitching as he turned his head uphill. Emily joined him and squinted at the incline. There, barely visible, were 2 long marks in the snow trailing down diagonally. "Slide marks," she murmured. "Someone fell or descended fast." Larson crouched beside the tracks. "Angle steep. Could have been unintentional. If Michael tried to take a shortcut across the slope and lost footing, it explains the limp and broken gear." Rachel stepped beside them, eyes scanning upward. He was trained for snow travel. He wouldn't fall unless something gave out, maybe ice or exhaustion. She looked down at Hunter, who now stood at the edge of the path, tail still, nose to the wind. Without warning, Hunter began walking, not down the slope but along its edge, nose close to the ground. Emily followed without question. Rachel and Larson exchanged a glance and moved after them. The trail curved into a narrow notch between 2 ridgelines, where wind had carved deep drifts into the base of the slope. Hunter moved faster now, despite his limp, weaving through thick pine boughs until he came to a stop beneath a wide tree with low, protective branches. Beneath it, partially buried in snow and covered in frost, was a survival satchel. Emily dropped to her knees and carefully unzipped it. Inside, a flare gun, a tin of crushed protein bars, a pack of stormproof matches, and a folded page torn from a wilderness map. Rachel pulled the page out gently and examined it. On the back, scrawled in red ink and slightly smudged from damp, "Cabiny Slope Backup Shelter. Any of Marker Rock." A faint arrow pointed east. Rachel turned to Larson. "He had a fallback plan." Larson nodded slowly. "There's an old avalanche shelter built in the 80s about half a mile from here. We used to use it for deep snow drills before it was condemned." Emily looked at Hunter. He knew where Michael was going. The group moved again, urgency replacing weariness. The trail narrowed, flanked by boulders and the skeletal remains of old snow fences. Emily found herself next to Rachel now, the 2 women moving in rhythm over the frozen earth. After a long silence, Rachel spoke. "You lost a dog too?" Emily hesitated. "Bruno. K-9 unit in Brooklyn. Shot during a hostage extraction. He took the hit meant for me." "I lost Eli during a snow search," Rachel said quietly. He was trying to reach a trapped skier. Avalanche swept the entire face of the ridge. We never found his body. Emily nodded, her voice low. Is that why you stopped? Rachel didn't answer right away. I didn't just stop. I ran. I blamed myself for convincing him to take that route. And when the dog he trained vanished, it felt like the whole team died with him. The two women walked in silence for a few more steps. Maybe Hunter's not just a reminder, Emily said. Maybe he's the part that stayed. Just ahead, Hunter let out a low bark and stood still. Through a cluster of trees, the outline of a cabin came into view, weathered, slanted, its roof partially caved under snow but walls intact. A chimney still stood, and smoke stains marked the beams above the doorway. They approached cautiously. Inside, the air was stale but safe. A broken stove, remnants of firewood, and a rough cot lined with old blankets. On a shelf above the cot sat an empty tin marked Trail Supplies SAR Unit 3. Rachel ran her hand along the walls. He made it here. He waited. Maybe until he couldn't. Emily walked over to the cot and found a folded page beneath the pillow. It was a journal scrap. A simple message written in shaky ink. If I don't make it, the dog knows. Trust him. Hunter sat beside the door and didn't move. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the tree canopy as the group stepped closer to the weather-worn cabin nestled deep in the forested basin. The air was hushed, not with fear, but with a kind of reverent stillness, as though even the wind knew to hold its breath. The cabin had clearly aged without care. Its logs faded to a silvery gray, patches of moss clinging to the foundation stones, the roof sagging under the weight of years and storms. Yet somehow it still stood, a stubborn remnant of wilderness resilience. Hunter approached first, paws sinking into the fresh snow as he reached the front step. He paused there, head lifted, ears angled forward. The others stopped behind him, instinctively sensing that something sacred lay beyond the crooked doorway. Emily stepped up beside him, slowly resting her hand on the rusted handle. She took in a breath and glanced back at Rachel, who gave a small nod. Captain Larson stayed behind, standing sentinel with the quiet patience of someone who'd seen too many endings. Emily pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, and a breath of cold air swept out like the sigh of a forgotten soul. Inside, the light from the afternoon sun barely penetrated the gloom, but it was enough to see the figure curled in the far corner, partially covered by a threadbare military-issue blanket. He was still too still, and for a moment, Emily feared they were too late. Then the blanket shifted. Emily rushed in, her boots clacking on the warped wooden floor. "Michael," she called gently, kneeling beside him. His skin was pale, his beard thick with frost, and his lips were cracked and dry. A makeshift splint of rope and bark held his leg in a twisted position, now swollen and discolored. His breathing was shallow but present. She pressed her fingers to his neck. The faint rhythm of life beat beneath the skin. Rachel entered moments later, her breath catching audibly when she saw her brother. She froze, as if her body had stepped into the past, unable to move forward. Her eyes darted over the scene, the fractured cot frame, the overturned canteen, the empty emergency pack lying nearby, and finally landed on Hunter, who had padded silently into the cabin and now lay down beside Michael's body, pressing his flank gently against his human shoulder. Rachel knelt. Her gloved hand trembled as she reached forward and brushed hair from Michael's forehead. "It's really him," she whispered. 3 years since we spoke, and he ends up here." Hunter didn't move. He simply closed his eyes and remained, breathing in rhythm with the man he had guarded for days. Emily looked around the cabin, noticing small details, scratches on the inner door, likely from Hunter pacing, a crude tally carved into the wall, as if Michael had tried to keep track of days. On a wooden shelf above the hearth, she found a piece of folded paper weighted down by a smooth stone. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, likely from exhaustion. No firewood left. Cold too deep to move. If the dog makes it out, trust him. He knows the way. Rachel, meanwhile, was unpacking her medical kit with quick, efficient motions. The familiarity of the task seemed to center her. She checked Michael's vitals, lifted his eyelids with a small penlight, and administered a saline 4 drip from her emergency pouch. "He's severely dehydrated," she murmured. "We need to warm his core, but not too fast. His right leg might be necrotic. He needs an evac, now." Emily activated her shoulder radio. "Dispatch, this is Sanders. We've located the subject, Michael Granger, alive but unconscious. Critical hypothermia and leg trauma. Sending GPS coordinates now. Request airlift immediate." A hiss of static, then confirmation. Rachel remained beside her brother, her hand now resting on his. "I was so angry," she whispered. "When he left. When he stopped calling. I didn't even go to Mom's funeral. I just cut him off." Emily crouched beside her. "Maybe you both ran from something you couldn't name. But you came back." Rachel didn't speak, but her hand tightened slightly around Michael's. A few feet away, Hunter stirred. He pushed himself up slowly and walked over to Emily. She noticed he limped more severely now, his paw trembling with each step, but he never whimpered. Instead, he sat directly in front of her and looked up, not with pleading, but with the quiet weight of purpose. "You didn't need a command," Emily said, voice low. "You just knew." She reached out and placed a hand gently on his head. His ears relaxed under her touch. Captain Larson finally entered, ducking under the low frame of the door. He took in the scene without a word. He approached the hearth, knelt to examine a pile of cold ash, and ran a gloved hand over the empty food wrappers on the floor. "He rationed everything," Larson said. "Probably kept the dog fed before himself. That's why he collapsed." He looked at Rachel. "If this dog hadn't made it to the road." "I know," she said. "He'd be dead." Outside, the sky began to dim again. Clouds gathered in the western horizon, heavy with more snow. The sound of a helicopter blade soon cut through the forest's hush. The group sprang into motion. Emily and Larson cleared space outside the cabin for the med team. Rachel administered warming pads and monitored Michael's breathing. Hunter stayed close, rising only when the stretcher was brought inside. As the medics carefully lifted Michael from the floor, Hunter followed every motion, pacing slightly as if preparing to board the flight himself. Rachel watched him, then turned to Emily. "He won't leave him." "Not willingly." Emily nodded. "Then we don't separate them." The cabin, once quiet, now pulsed with movement. Yet at its center, one bond remained still and unshaken, a dog and his human, reunited in silence. As the stretcher was carried outside and the snow began to fall again in soft flurries, Rachel walked behind it, one hand gently resting on Hunter's back. She looked up once toward the trees, the weight in her chest a little lighter. "I'm back," she whispered. And for the first time in years, she meant it. The wind that swept through Pinebrook Ridge in the days following the rescue was softer now, brushing through the pine needles like breath rather than blade. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, in broken branches, in downed signs, and in the quiet that followed every footstep. At the edge of town, nestled between a snow-lined trail and a small creek now beginning to thaw, sat the Pinebrook Community Recovery Center. Built from pale cedar and river stone, the center resembled more of a mountain lodge than a clinic. Its windows were wide, its roof low and slanted, and warm light often spilled through its glass panels at dusk like the house itself had a heartbeat. Inside, room 3A had been repurposed. Once a supply room, it now held a cot, 2 chairs, a small heater, and a thick woolen mat where Hunter lay stretched in a lazy half-circle, his head resting on his forepaws. The bandage on his leg had been replaced with a sleeker wrap, and his coat had begun to shine again, brushed daily by volunteers. But his eyes still carried the shadows of the woods, always watching the hallway, always alert to distant footsteps. Rachel Granger stood just outside the door, arms crossed loosely over her chest. She wore a navy sweatshirt with faded text that read University of Montana Veterinary Sciences. Her auburn hair was pulled into a low ponytail now, and her boots were flecked with salt and snow. In her left hand, she held a thin stack of enrollment forms. She'd filled them out the previous night, in quiet, alone, staring at the ceiling for long minutes before signing her name at the bottom. It had been years since she allowed herself to want anything beyond survival. But watching Hunter heal had stirred something dormant in her, something warm and trembling and unfamiliar. Hope. Michael, her brother, remained in the medical wing next door. Still unconscious, but improving. His vitals had stabilized, and his leg, though badly fractured, had responded to early interventions. Rachel visited him every morning, but it was Hunter who refused to leave his side until nurses gently coaxed him away. The only time Hunter would eat was when Rachel was in the room. "He's imprinting on you," said Dr. Meredith Cole, the center's lead coordinator, a woman in her early 50s with short silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a gait shaped by years of hiking uneven hospital floors. Meredith had a brisk manner, sharp eyes, but a hidden softness for both animals and the people they protected. She watched Rachel now with a knowing look as they stood outside room 3A. "Or maybe, he remembers you from before. Sometimes bonds get passed like torches." Rachel exhaled through her nose. "I don't know if I deserve it." "You stayed," Meredith said. "That counts for something." In the common room beyond, Emily Sanders knelt by a low table where a young boy named Caleb was stacking blocks, his fingers still shaky from recent therapy. Emily wasn't in uniform today. She wore a thermal vest, jeans, and boots still dusted with dry snow. Her expression was softer than usual, though the lines around her eyes told stories most people didn't dare ask about. She had taken the last few days off duty after the rescue. She didn't say why, but the way she lingered around the recovery center said everything. Emily watched Caleb fumble the blocks, then gently offered him a smile. "You know, there's a dog here who helped find someone in a snowstorm," she said. "He didn't bark, didn't panic. He just stayed until help arrived." Caleb looked up briefly, then returned to the blocks. Emily didn't push further. She just stayed, like the dog she had described. Later that afternoon, Rachel stepped into Hunter's room with a bowl of warm chicken broth. He lifted his head immediately, ears perking just slightly. She set the bowl down in front of him and settled onto the floor beside the mat. As he began to drink, she pulled a small notebook from her coat pocket and opened it. Inside were sketches, mostly rough outlines, of dogs in motion, rescue gear, makeshift harnesses. Notes scrawled in margins read, "Therapy Protocol Trial, PTSD Support Model, Non-Command Response." On the corner of one page, she'd written a name, the silent lead. "Meredith thinks you're therapy material," she said softly, watching Hunter lap at the broth. "I think you're more than that." There was a knock at the doorframe. Emily stood there, one hand in her pocket, the other holding a manila folder. "Got a minute?" Rachel looked up and nodded. Emily entered and pulled the second chair closer. "I've been thinking," she began. "You know, I've worked with dogs before. Partnered with them. Lost one too." Her voice hitched slightly, but she kept going. "What you and Hunter have, what he's done, that's not just training. That's instinct." Rachel tilted her head. "You thinking of working with him?" Emily smiled faintly. "I'm thinking of building something around him. A program. For vets, for kids like Caleb, even first responders. Therapy dogs, trained not just to obey, but to feel, to choose." Rachel tapped her notebook thoughtfully. "You're talking about a dual-track protocol. Emotional co-responsiveness instead of command-reward." "Exactly," Emily said. "He chose to stay with Michael. He chose to find us. That's more than behavior." Rachel looked at Hunter, who had now finished the broth and was resting his chin on her knee. "Let's build it then," she said. "Together." In the weeks that followed, the center shifted. What began as recovery turned into research, planning, and preparation. Meredith offered office space. Emily met with Pinebrook's town council. Rachel began rewriting her thesis from 5 years ago, only now it had new life, new data, and a living case study. Hunter, meanwhile, became a constant presence. Children were drawn to him. Veterans sat in silence beside him. A girl named Tessa, who hadn't spoken since a car accident, whispered her first word beside his mat, "Safe." Emily watched all of it unfold with a kind of reverent patience. And Rachel, in her quiet way, returned, not just to the field or the profession, but to herself. The morning light broke over Pine Brook like a quiet promise, spilling soft gold across the rooftops and the snow-lined trail that led to the new wing of the recovery center. The sign above the glass door, etched in clean pine lettering, read the silent lead animal-assisted healing. It wasn't a grand structure, just a modest extension of the original facility, but what it lacked in size, it carried in intent. Inside, walls were painted in earth tones and corners held textured mats, weighted blankets, sensory toys, and most importantly, wide spaces where humans and animals could meet in their own time, in their own way. It was the day of the first test run for Dreamwatch, the pilot program Rachel and Emily had developed around Hunter's silent loyalty. It was a soft launch, no cameras, no press, just staff, a few volunteers, and 3 selected children recovering from various forms of trauma. The premise was simple. Hunter would be allowed to roam freely between 2 paths. One would lead him outside to the open forest trail, quiet, wild, and familiar. The other would guide him toward the courtyard, where the children waited. Emily stood at the threshold, her vest zipped up to the collar, clipboard in hand. She watched Hunter emerge from the holding room where he'd spent the night. His coat gleamed, recently brushed, and a green therapy vest sat lightly on his back, though he wore it without the usual patches. They'd agreed, this first choice should be his alone. Rachel knelt beside him at the threshold. She wore a soft gray hoodie under her old veterinary college jacket, her braid pulled loose, boots laced but unzipped at the top, comfortable real. She placed a gentle hand on Hunter's chest and whispered, "No commands. You choose like always." The observers, among them Dr. Meredith, a trauma psychologist named Eric Lindley, and occupational therapist Sarah Monroe, stood to the side behind a low partition. Sarah, a woman in her early 40s with tightly coiled black curls and large brown eyes, leaned forward, nervous and hopeful. She had brought her own son, Jonah, into the program. He was one of the kids waiting in the courtyard now, fingers absently tracing circles in a patch of snow while another girl sat nearby. That girl was Lily. Lily was 8 years old and had not spoken since the age of 6, when she survived a car accident that took both her parents. She was small for her age, with dark blonde hair always pulled into a messy ponytail, and eyes so wide and still they sometimes unsettled the staff. She had not resisted being part of the program, but she hadn't shown much reaction either, until she first saw Hunter 2 days prior and reached out, almost on instinct, to touch his side. Now, seated cross-legged on a soft rubber mat, Lily waited without any visible emotion. But her fingers tapped the floor in a rhythmic, silent count. Emily opened the gate. Hunter stood still for a moment, his head tilted slightly, as if taking in the world on both sides. To his left, the trees whispered gently in the breeze, calling him back to the untamed solitude where he'd endured and survived. To his right, laughter floated faintly from the courtyard, carried by small voices and the scent of fresh pine bark and old leaves. He took one step toward the forest, just one. Then he turned his head, looked back at Rachel, then at Emily, then at the wide sky, and pivoted. Without a sound, without hesitation, he walked toward the children. The therapists didn't speak. No one did. They just watched, breath shallow. Hunter entered the courtyard like a wave slipping through tall grass. No rush, no fanfare. Jonah stopped stacking his foam blocks and stared. Another boy blinked at him in awe. But it was Lily who moved first. She rose to her knees, unsteady but purposeful. Hunter paused just in front of her, his tail low and still. She raised her hand, trembling slightly, and touched the tip of his ear. He didn't move. She leaned forward until her forehead nearly brushed his, then whispered, so softly that only Rachel and Sarah could hear it through the observation monitor. "Friend." Sarah gasped. Tears filled her eyes instantly, and she reached for the wall to steady herself. Meredith covered her mouth. Emily scribbled nothing. She just watched, her eyes wide. Lily smiled, only slightly, and placed both hands gently on Hunter's shoulders. He lowered himself to the mat beside her, curling into a soft coil. She rested her cheek on his fur. No one said anything for a full minute. Then Rachel exhaled and whispered to herself, he made his choice. That afternoon, As the children played under a soft snowfall and therapists took careful notes between quiet glances of awe, Emily stepped into the old staff lounge and poured a fresh cup of black coffee. Rachel joined her, holding a notebook now marked with a new label, Field Notes Hunter Protocol/Child-Directed Intervention. Emily leaned back against the counter. "So," she said, "forest or people?" Rachel chuckled, rubbing her thumb over the corner of the notebook. He didn't choose to leave the wild. He chose to carry it into the human world. "Think we can replicate that?" "Maybe not the bond," Rachel said, "but we can build a space where it can happen again. On their terms." Hunter lay on his mat by the fire later that evening, a soft knitted blanket covering his back, courtesy of one of the center's volunteers. Lily passed by with a book under her arm and paused. She reached down, stroked his head once, and continued on without a word. Hunter blinked, adjusted slightly, and fell asleep to the rhythm of quiet footsteps behind him. The morning of the dedication ceremony came with a sky the color of soft slate and a breeze just crisp enough to wake the skin. Snow, no longer falling, lay clean and untouched across Pinebrook's trailheads and rooftops like a blessing preserved. The path leading to the new facility curved gently through tall evergreens, now adorned with hand-carved wooden signs painted by the children in soft blues and greens. One read, "Courage Corner," another, "Whisper Hall," but the largest stood just outside the building's main doors. It was carved from pine, sanded smooth, and fastened to the ground with river stones. Burned into it with deliberate strokes were the words, "He didn't follow orders. He followed love." That was Lily's contribution. She'd help stain the wood and trace each letter with her small fingers before handing the chisel back to a volunteer. Her laugh, unmistakably hers, had rung out in the clear mountain air, sharp and bright. It was only her third laugh in public since the accident. Her mother, Caroline, a soft-spoken woman with quiet green eyes and a worn winter coat 2 sizes too big, had stood by silently, wiping tears from the corners of her eyes as Lily beamed up at the sign like it held the sun. Inside the newly opened Hunter's Path Center for Animal-Assisted Healing, warmth poured from the fireplace at the center of the atrium, where children, veterans, and quiet adults sat in soft chairs shaped like stones or curled into corners with weighted blankets. The air smelled faintly of cedar and warm tea. There were no beeping machines here, no harsh lights, only gentle voices, fur against cloth, and space to breathe. Hunter lay on a wide mat near the center fireplace, a soft green vest across his back embroidered with no words, only a stitched image of a pine tree and a rising sun. His coat gleamed from weekly grooming, and though his right leg still carried a subtle limp, he moved with a kind of meditative grace. To the children, he was no longer just a dog. He was a guardian, a presence, a choice made flesh. Emily Sanders stood just beyond the atrium doors, looking out across the gathering crowd forming on the path. She wore a fitted charcoal coat, her patrol badge no longer pinned to her chest. In its place was a small bronze pendant in the shape of a shepherd dog's head. Her hair had grown slightly, pulled now into a short, low bun, and her expression, once always alert, had softened into something more reflective. Next to her, Rachel Granger adjusted a large easel that held a blueprint of the center's expansion plan. Her sleeves were pushed up, exposing forearms faintly scarred from years of emergency field work. She now wore glasses again, something she'd long abandoned during her wilderness years. They suited her, made her look like someone who had stopped running. Tucked under her arm was a binder filled with curriculum drafts, grant letters, and a rough outline for the Silent Lead certification, a course she'd developed over the last 2 months to help other therapists learn to work with dogs like Hunter. Michael stood by the entrance, propped against a cane, his right leg in a specialized brace. He wore a wool-lined jacket and a quiet half-smile. His beard was trimmed, but the wildness in his eyes had not been extinguished, only gentled. He moved slowly but with purpose, greeting guests who came from the community, from neighboring towns, and even from the state therapy board. He didn't say much. He let his presence speak. As the gathering began, Sarah Monroe, the occupational therapist with the kind smile and perpetually ink-stained fingers, stepped up to the front podium. Her curls were pulled into a high bun, and she wore a scarf covered in tiny paw prints. "We're here not just to open a building," she began, "but to honor what brought us here, silence, survival, and the animals who never ask us to explain our pain to be worthy of healing." She gestured toward the fireplace, where Hunter now lay surrounded by 3 children reading aloud to him. He didn't come from a clinic or a textbook. He came from the cold, from instinct, and from love. And he chose us. When Sarah stepped down, Michael limped forward slowly. His voice, soft and deliberate, carried through the atrium like wind across the ridgeline. "I train dogs to find people. I never trained one to bring me back. But this one did." His eyes flicked toward Hunter. "And not just me. All of us." Applause was gentle. Not explosive. Just warm. Human. Later, as people wandered through the new therapy rooms, Emily and Rachel stepped outside to the bench beneath the pine tree where it had all begun. A small plaque had been added to the ground below it. For those who stayed. For those who waited. For those who chose love. "I think you should teach full-time," Emily said, sipping from a thermos. "I think you should run the center," Rachel replied, pulling a knit hat down over her ears. They both laughed. Hunter stepped between them, nudging his nose into Rachel's palm, then leaning his body lightly against Emily's leg. "I think he already made the appointments," Emily joked. In the weeks that followed, Hunter's path became more than a pilot. It became a sanctuary. Veterans found courage in quiet canine companionship. Children learned to speak without needing words. Grieving adults found places to rest. Not everyone healed quickly. Not everyone stayed. But all who came left with the memory of one dog who did not wait to be commanded. He waited to be trusted. Lily continued her sessions. She learned to read out loud, softly at first, then with color. Her drawings became brighter. Her laugh, rare but radiant, now echoed down the hall at least once a week. One day, she brought in a painted sign of her own and hung it in the hallway above Hunter's usual mat. It read, "Home doesn't need a name when you know you belong." And beneath it, she signed simply, "Love, Lily." Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. They arrive quietly, on 4 paws, through a storm, wrapped in loyalty and love. Hunter didn't wait for instructions. He followed the voice of something greater, compassion, purpose, and perhaps even a whisper from God himself. In a world that often rushes past the quiet ones, this story reminds us that healing doesn't always shout. Sometimes it listens, sometimes it waits, and sometimes it comes through a silent guardian who chooses love over command. Maybe you too are someone's miracle in the making. Maybe your quiet presence, your small kindness, or your silent endurance is the very answer someone's been praying for. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who may need hope. Leave a comment and tell us how you've seen love move in silence. And if you believe that God still works through the unlikely, the loyal, and the forgotten, type amen below. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that bring light in the darkest places. And may God bless each of you watching, wherever you are in the world.